Lumberjack found huge lump on tree. Gut told him to cut it open. A lumberjack was cutting down a strange, lumpy tree when his chainsaw hit something that wasn't wood. The saw screamed with the high-pitched shriek of metal on metal and kicked back violently. Stunned and confused, the lumberjack examined the cut. Embedded deep within the heart of the living tree was a piece of rusted, foreign steel. He grabbed his axe to split the strange lump open and investigate further. But what he uncovered was a secret so dangerous and so explosive it would force the immediate evacuation and permanent closure of the entire forest. But before we start our story, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and hit that notifications bell so you won't miss any of our new, incredible stories. To understand the terrifying secret hidden inside those trees, we must first travel back to one of the most brutal and devastating battlefields in human history, the Western Front of World War I. For 4 years, from 1914 to 1918, the armies of Europe were locked in a horrific stalemate of trench warfare, and the defining feature of this war was the artillery. Day after day, for years on end, millions upon millions of high-explosive artillery shells were fired by both sides, transforming the once peaceful farmlands and forests of France and Belgium into a nightmarish, cratered moonscape. The Battle of Verdun in 1916 was a 10-month-long meat grinder where an estimated 70 million artillery shells were fired. That is more than one shell fired every single second for 10 straight months. But here is a crucial and terrifying fact. A significant percentage of these shells, some experts estimate as high as 30%, were duds. They were fired, but they failed to explode on impact. They simply buried themselves deep in the mud, their deadly, explosive contents still perfectly intact. After the war ended, an immense and impossible task began: the cleanup. The French government designated a vast area of northeastern France, the site of the most intense fighting, as the Zone Rouge, or the Red Zone. It was an area so devastated, so saturated with unexploded ordnance, human remains, and toxic chemicals that it was deemed too dangerous for human habitation. For the last 100 years, a special department of the French government has been engaged in a never-ending process known as the récolte de fer, or the iron harvest. Every year, as farmers in the region plow their fields, they unearth tons of this deadly historical debris, rusted artillery shells, corroded grenades, and unexploded mortar rounds. While the fields were slowly and painstakingly cleared, the vast forests of the region were a different story. The trees that survived the war and the new ones that began to grow in the decades that followed became silent witnesses to the conflict, and they began to interact with the iron harvest in a unique and insidious way. A tree does not grow like a human, pushing upwards from its base. It grows outwards and upwards from its tips. The tree's trunk will slowly and patiently grow around the object, its bark and wood engulfing it, year after year, decade after decade, until the object is completely swallowed, hidden deep within the heart of the tree. A soldier's rifle leaned against a tree in 1917 would, by the 21st century, be a solid metal secret entombed in the center of a massive, mature oak. This is the natural process that turned a quiet French forest into a living minefield. Our story's protagonist, a man we'll call Hank, is a modern-day lumberjack. He is not a historian or a soldier. He is a professional who knows wood. He understands the grain, the weight, and the feel of a healthy tree. In the spring of 2024, his company was tasked with logging a remote, state-owned section of forest in a region known for its WWI history. As he and his partner began to survey the area, Hank felt a growing sense of unease. The trees here were different. Many of the large, mature beeches and oaks were disfigured, their trunks bearing strange, unnatural, bulbous lumps. They looked like tumors, woody growths that protruded from the bark. He had never seen anything like it on such a widespread scale. It wasn't just one or two trees. It was the entire forest. Driven by a mixture of professional curiosity and a concern that the trees might be diseased, they decided to fell one of the most deformed-looking specimens to investigate. Hank revved his powerful chainsaw and began to make the first cut. Immediately, he knew something was wrong. The wood felt unusually dense, and the saw blade began to struggle, kicking back with a dangerous amount of force. He had to fight the saw to keep it from binding. After a long and difficult cut, the massive tree finally began to groan and crash to the forest floor. Hank and his partner approached the fallen giant and examined one of the large, strange lumps. He took his heavy felling axe and with a powerful swing, he brought it down on the center of the lump, and then it stopped dead with a sickening, high-pitched clang of metal on metal. The impact sent a painful vibration up the handle and into Hank's arms. He stared at his axe, which was now wedged tightly in the lump. He could see the distinct pineapple-like serrated shape of a heavily rusted but very real World War I-era hand grenade. He froze, his blood turning to ice. He had just struck a live 100-year-old explosive with a steel axe. He realized with a wave of absolute terror that the entire forest around him, every single one of these lumpy, deformed trees, was a silent, living arsenal. For a long moment that stretched into an eternity, Hank and his partner did not move. They were frozen in a state of pure, primal terror. They knew that the slightest vibration, the slightest shift, could potentially complete a circuit or disturb a detonator that had been waiting patiently for over a century. With a slow, deliberate motion that required every ounce of his self-control, Hank fumbled for his satellite phone and made the most urgent call of his life. The response from the authorities was swift and serious. The local police arrived first, establishing a wide perimeter and sealing off all access roads to the forest. But they were soon joined by a highly specialized unit, a team that is a constant and necessary presence in this part of France, the Department of Demining. These are the modern-day soldiers still fighting the First World War. For over a century, these brave EOD experts have been tasked with the never-ending iron harvest, the recovery and disposal of the estimated hundreds of millions of unexploded shells and bombs that still litter the former battlefields. They are intimately familiar with the dangers of century-old munitions. When the demining team arrived and saw Hank's axe still embedded in the tree, they immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The science of old explosives is a terrifying field. Over the decades, the chemical compounds inside these weapons begin to break down and become dangerously unstable. The nitroglycerin in old grenades can weep through the metal casing. The intricate firing mechanisms and detonators inside the artillery shells and grenades corrode. Hank's axe strike, a direct metal-on-metal impact, should have, by all logic, detonated the grenade, killing both him and his partner instantly. He had survived by sheer dumb luck. Dressed in heavy blast suits, the demining team began the incredibly tense process of making the scene safe. They first used a specialized rope system to carefully pull the axe free from a safe distance. Then, using a remote-controlled cutting tool, they carefully cut away the section of the tree trunk, but the investigation was far from over. The deminers now turned their attention to the rest of the forest. If one tree held a bomb, it was likely that others did too. Using advanced, deep-penetrating metal detectors, they began to scan the other lumpy, deformed trees in the area, and their worst fears were confirmed. One after another, their detectors let out a high-pitched squeal. The strange woody tumors on the trees were not a disease. They were the telltale sign of a tree that had, decades ago, as a young sapling, grown around a piece of military ordnance. They found trees that had swallowed artillery shells, like the first, had grown around grenades that had been left behind in the chaos of battle. The final report was chilling. The entire section of the forest was a unique and unprecedented type of active minefield. The authorities had no choice but to declare the area a permanent exclusion zone, sealing it off from all future logging operations and from the public forever. Hank Fletcher's shocking discovery had undoubtedly saved the lives of future lumberjack crews who, unaware of the history lurking inside the wood, could have easily hit one of these hidden bombs with a chainsaw with catastrophic results. The story is a powerful and unsettling reminder that the great wars of the past are never truly over. Their deadly legacy lies sleeping, not just in the soil of the old battlefields, but in the very heart of the living trees that have grown up to cover the scars. It is a story of how nature, in its slow, patient, and silent process of healing and regrowth, can sometimes conceal the most dangerous secrets of our own violent history.